and our moderator, Mr. Nikhil Dhar, Program Chair, Department of Landscape Architecture, IES College of Architecture. This panel is going to be a dialogue on reconciling ecological preservation with urban growth, especially in sensitive zones like floodplains and reserved forests. And over to our moderator.
Hello. I hope everyone can hear me back there. Great. Welcome to day 2 of the DDA Green Expo. Thank you for being here. Big thank you to our panelists for taking the time to be with us today. We'll structure this, and I'll keep my initial comments very short because I'm sure we all want to listen to things from the panelists rather than me. Just a few points that I wanted to make that relate to this debate of conservation versus development and a binary or a dilemma that we consider them. There are examples that many of us can relate to of this dilemma, this conflict everywhere. A few that resonate with me, and perhaps they resonate with you as well. I travel to Mumbai a lot, so the coastal road has made travel between different parts of the city so easy and so convenient, and it's cut so much of the travel time. The negatives, and there always are negatives, there's a disruption and destruction of the shoreline, the citizens' access to it, cultural practices, and the marine and land liminal ecologies are disturbed. We've seen many highways being constructed to the hills and mountains, often to places of pilgrimage and tourism, which has enabled people who may never have been able to get there easily and quickly, and a larger number of people to go there. The negatives are, of course, the disturbance and destruction of delicately balanced natural ecosystems and landscapes, and to my mind, a certain diminishment of sanctity and a type of tourism that perhaps doesn't quite fit what it's meant to be. We've seen the example recently, or two examples that I can think of. The Cherry Blossom Festival in Fuji-Yoshida in Japan was cancelled by the village because of disruptions and the over-tourism that was happening. Sisu village in Lahaul Spiti has stopped all tourism during their winter festivals so that their cultural practices will not be disturbed. So we see examples all around us. I also wanted to mention the social issues that relate to development and conservation. Often the policy decisions that are made impact disproportionately heavily the weakest parts of society who find it difficult to have a voice in such things. And their participation is negligible. So can we find ways to involve them as well? I know Dr. Pellisseri will be talking about this in his talk. Sometimes we lose cultural landscapes and traditions, sometimes livelihoods in this development race. The disruptions are many. We've seen them, the flooding, the pollution, the drying up of natural systems, biodiversity loss, heat islands. I think it's imperative, and I speak as a landscape architect primarily and a teacher, I think it's imperative to acknowledge existing natural systems and the fact that they spread across administrative and political boundaries and do not respect them. I was wondering if we can define when we work certain non-negotiables, and those non-negotiables could relate to natural systems that must be preserved, as well as development pressures that also must be addressed. And can we find balanced solutions that acknowledge both of these? Another point I wanted to make was to consult experts. And we know it is important to know who to ask and what to ask. I think it's also important to know when to ask experts, because the sooner we have a team of experts talking to each other and working on projects, the more effective our decisions are. I found that sometimes, as a last resort, activism comes into the thing. And I often wonder, can we build in stronger intra-institutional checks so that this activism does not become necessary, and we can actually look at multiple sides of the issue. So that was my short little comment. I'll start with Dr. Pellisseri. Uh, Sony, as you asked me to call you, your public policy work has a strong emphasis on distributive justice. Could you explain this concept and how does it work on the ground and in policy?
First of all, thank you to this invitation and the opportunity to speak in this platform of DDA Green Expo. Let me begin with the middle path that we are searching, that is development and conversation and the conservation that we have been given as a topic for today. And within that, the idea of the distributive justice question. So if we look at how the idea of development doctrine evolved, so to say, since 1950s, every decade you can see a different type of focus coming in. Largely, if we look at this, so to say, 70 years of experience since 1950, you can divide that into two types of focuses. First one is a focus on growth, especially since 1970s. All focus of the development was on growth. By 1970s, there was a realization that this kind of a growth model doesn't work. And that is where in many other countries, especially European countries, there was also critical thinking about their own urban development and what is called as today as a new urbanism that emerged. And India and many other countries, in southern countries, it was a realization through the experience of inequality and deepening poverty that happened. That is where the second type of a development emerged, focused on justice. So, two pathways. Should the planning be focusing on growth, or should the planning be done on justice? These became the divergent path of discussion when we talk about development versus conservation. Urban planning as a tool in this context, uh, both for growth as well as justice, primarily mimicked what was done in first world countries. Our urban imaginaries were just like our cities will develop like the Western cities. This had a huge problem. What was the problem? Primarily, the problem was threefold. These cities were imagined as aesthetic spaces. These cities will look like beautiful place. Second, cities will be the temples of modernization. It will reflect not a backward village, but it will look a modern area with high-rise building, beautiful buildings. And third, functional differentiation. That is, there will be a business district, there will be residential area, there will be industrial area. This kind of a urban imaginary was not suitable for southern cities like ours, Delhi or Bangalore or Hyderabad. Our cities are very complex and very interconnected. To think about examples like uh, circular migration, it is not there if you go to London or New York, but it's very much part of our city culture. Similarly, we will see a multi-mode production here happening, which we won't see in many other global north cities. These three patterns of mimicking the Western city planning, as I said, aesthetics, modernization, and functional differentiation, they were primarily keeping the market interest in mind. If you have got a city like that, markets will naturally come in there. This is where the difficulty with justice question or the ecological sensitivity question come in, because markets naturally logic is to extract the resources from these cities, and more in last 5 or say 20 years, what has happened is cities in this whole globalized market have begun to look like very much alike. So, for example, every city wants to have flyovers, every city wants to have metro, every city wants to have a large highway passing through from a rural remote area. So, it is very difficult to distinguish between whether it looks like Shanghai or Delhi or New York. Everything looks same. So, that is the process where cities lost its character. So we can say what the beginning of it, Delhi losing its character because it cut off from its natural environment. So maybe as a exercise we can do, I can challenge in Delhi airport, you can take a survey of the people who are coming to airport, ask a question. Do you know where is Delhi, which is the largest source of water in Delhi? I'm sure 95% of them will not know. They would have used Delhi city and gone, and they would not know which is the largest source of water in. Why? What is the reason? Because every city looks alike. I really don't know what it is. I am sure there will be some people sitting here who doesn't know which is the largest source of water in Delhi. Because we do not know. We are cut off from the reality with which we are living. And that kind of extraction and becoming alienated is the challenge of creating a city which is very what we call as a zombie city. It's a very dangerous situation in which we will be going. So in some way, this crisis of alienation is an invitation back to us. We are sitting close to that water source, and therefore sitting here, we should see this crisis as an opportunity to connect back to us and to create this possibility of finding a middle path. Maybe more on the next round when I want to speak.
Thank you. That's a good cue, I think, to ask Ms. Kesarwani, the water connection. You worked many years in Gurugram. As people who live very close in the NCR, some of Gurugram's problems are ours as well. I think, or the feeling I get is that many of Gurugram's problems stem from a sort of ad hoc or piecemeal planning approach, and which lead to many issues with water channels, paleo channels, and traditional systems and water bodies. How difficult is it to retrofit the solutions that you work on in such a dense and disturbed thing? And how can we sort of find lessons for Delhi from this?
Thank you, Dr. Dha, for that question. I think that is very, very interesting. And that's true not only for Gurgaon, but most of the cities that of the country and of the world also. The natural geography has been changed massively. And a lot of irreversible damage has also been done. So when we lose an ecology, when we don't consider the hydrogeology in the planning, in the design, in the implementation for whatsoever reason, it's hard to bring it back. But there are still design solutions. For an example, if you're talking about Gurugram particularly, that's on the foothills of Aravallis. A larger part of it, at least the southern Gurugram, is the foothills of Aravalli, the Sona region especially, and that has a lot of saline water. So what happens is now, because the region has a lot of groundwater which is saline in nature, it is not consumable. So we have to create campuses and villages which are water neutral. So we've designed a plan for Damdama, Kherla, Abhepur, which is adjacent villages right next to the Damdama lake, which has reduced by almost 150% in last 60 years, which is Haryana's biggest freshwater lake. The idea is to create water neutral villages so that the villages are self-contained, and rather instead of promoting the reverse aquifer recharge, they supply the water. And that is possible only because we have demonstrated similar kind of solution in the BSF campus, now doing in the CRPF campus, which is all on the foothills of Aravallis. The idea is that, of course, we can go ahead with activism and say, but that's not the solution. We have to demonstrate the pilot, convert those passion pilots into administrative and institutional systems, which can then be scalable. And by having a lot of demonstration sites here, I think that is a good example to pick up the queue and to create a replica and say, okay, this is doable. And this is the changed reality. We also have to acknowledge it. We can't go ahead and say, oh, we want the things to be in a certain way and that's the only way we want it. No, that they cannot be true. And I totally believe that conservation and development will go hand in hand. That's the only way to sustain, and the larger part of sustainability is about it. But we have to integrate it in terms of design solutions. We will not be able to cut, copy, paste the generic designs. We'll have to have like a hyper local hydrology for all the catchments of all the floodplain buffers of the drought regions, of the saline regions, to figure out how are we going to integrate it. And in my understanding, that's a good way to proceed. And there are multiple demonstrations which have been done across different geographies in India. One needs to look at it and customize it for their geography, for their context, and see if there is a community co-ownership, if there is a hyper local solution to it, if there's a policy alignment to it, if there's blended finance available, and if there's a demonstrated solution which we can pick up and learn from. So that's what I believe, and definitely there's more.
Thank you. Crystal clear. You talked in your last sentence a bit about community involvement, etc. And one of the Gurujal's emphasis is on transparent governance, as I see. How does that work on the ground in your projects?
So, how does it work? We have a core understanding. We say it's the three core principles of how Gurujal works, and that's my. Now, prior to starting Gurujal, I used to work for the Chief Minister's Office of Haryana, and thanks to that, I've learned a lot from it. That it has to work in a hyper local solution, but it needs to go back to the policy alignment. Saying, for an example, when we started working in Gurugram, we said, okay, 95% of the water bodies are wastewater bodies. That's an accepted reality. Now, what's next? So the understanding is saying there are decentralized surface bodies still remaining, and 95% them of are because sustaining because they are getting regular perennial supply, which is wastewater here. So let's have nature-based solutions to clean it at the source when water enters the water body. But this has not been notified in the state, not notified in the country. So we went back to the state government, we went back to the Niti Aayog saying, this is the problem statement, what do we do? So then we went and both of them said, we don't have a solution for it yet. Why don't you start something and give us an example? So that's how we proceeded. And that led to the pond authority in Haryana. And that also led to us co-creating a SOP for pond rejuvenation with Niti Aayog and publishing it, saying, because we piloted with 7 different technologies in Gurugram and demonstrated what worked, what did not work. And very clearly, very transparently, we piloted all the electromechanical solutions, the MBBR, MBR, SBR, AER technologies as well. But we also did the root zone, the DWATs, the constructed wetland, the bioenzyme, the soil phytography. So we did all of it to relate and compare what worked and what did not work. Integrated in the policy alignment. Then it got rolled out, and now everybody is talking about nature-based solution. And I thank a lot NIUA and WRI also to pushing it forth. And then Jal Jeevan Mission happened, which further took it to multiple scale. So that's how there was a pilot. It got adopted by the government, and now the community is also taking ownership because communities' understanding of wastewater treatment systems was, oh, it's going to stink, it's going to smell, it's not going to look pretty. These systems will not work half of the times because there's electricity disruption. But when they see nature-based solution, they see flowers. They see they don't get the bad odor, right? They see the quality of water improving, the birds coming back, the turtles coming back, and it took us some time to win the trust of the community. It took us 3 demonstrative years to win that. From ignorance to anger to now being co-owners. It did work, but we also worked on the multiple layers. Is that we'll work with the experts, we'll create experts at the ground, so that once we phase out, the community is not left hampered saying, we don't know who to reach out to help for. So we created We for Water Fellows, who are recruited from the community, who are trained, who were involved in the from the design process to the implementation to maintenance. So even if we step away, they have a local people to depend upon. Then second layer was 7 stakeholder groups that we identified at the community level. The SHGs, the schools, the colleges, the FPOs, the Nehru Yuva Kendra, and said, how do we work with you in an individual and collective capacity to strengthen you? Then created volunteer groups also, which by the government norms goes by Amrit Seva Samu in Haryana. It goes by different names in biodiversity management committees in the other states. So we work around that and we create a 3-tier approach to work with the community and integrate the solution and ensure that it stays more than the design period.
Wonderful. Great example of getting grassroots organizations together who will go up and actually influence policy. Wonderful. Mr. Sandhu, I'd like to come to you now. Vast experience of government work as well as your own consultancy management consultancy organization. As someone who's been involved in policy making from the government, what is this elusive animal that we are chasing, balanced development? What does it look like on the ground as someone who's been so involved in so many projects?
Yeah. Good morning, everybody. So I think we must realize the fact that we are one of the most populated countries on the planet. We are also, as a nation, reorganized after the Second World War. And if you see the kind of progress we have made, we have all reasons to be proud of ourselves. At the same time, we will continue to be aspirational and grow to 47 and beyond. And this whole century is a century of rebuilding for us, and building and rebuilding. The advanced economies took nearly 300 years to reach where they are today. We have much to catch up on, and therefore the development and the infrastructure and project building, that will continue. The question therefore becomes even more important for us: how to manage this in a way that it works for us, works for our people, and at the same time we are sustainable. We are the first country of the bloc to announce a net zero target. Some people say it's too much in the future, but it's a challenge that's been taken. And we are working towards that challenge. I think in our policy paradigm, we need to, from my experience, and that's the way I've been thinking about it, we need to look at the environment, and we look at the environment, we look at the earth. So the earth has been around for the longest period of time. Therefore, let's respect that. Because if we don't respect earth, somewhere along the line, it will let us know that it is unhappy with us. Example. Let me take an example from Punjab. It's a food bowl of the country, Punjab, Haryana. Over the last 20, 30 years, what should be mentioned? We have taken bulldozers to the complete lay of the land in Punjab and Haryana. And part of the problem in Gurugram also when we developed the urban area. Therefore, we have destroyed millions of years of water channels that took water away whenever there was, once in a 20-year or once a 30-year or once a 40-year flood. And we could survive. Today, we have flash floods in Punjab almost every alternate year, One problem is that since we've dammed the Satluj and the Bias, our young Himalayan mountains will continue to throw in silt, and the base of the rivers is rising, and so even a minor rain down the level actually makes a floodplain much larger. So I think we have disrespected the land, and we are facing for it. The Yamuna, we've encroached into the Yamuna's floodplain in a big way here. So I think that's the first thing that we need to understand. We need to respect the land. My experience of global urban areas is they do not take a bulldozer very easily to what they are building. I see most successful cities in the world, they are up and down and undulating, and that also adds a charm to the way they are built. But here, the first thing that we do is get a bulldozer and level everything. I think that's a disrespect for the earth, which has been around here for the longest period of time. So, as a principle, respect earth. Try not to change it too much. Try to see how you can build a project by respecting that. Second, well, people have been around for a long time, much before the project came. Therefore, respect people. Projects succeed when people participate, when communities participate, and they are part of the design. And when we respect people and their needs, they will tell us how they are using the project, how they're using how will make sure that the environment is sustained. And you have at least the base of a environmentally successful and a project that has consensus from the people, and that people's consensus also translates into political consensus, because finally things have to be decided in legislative assemblies and parliaments, and budgets have to be sanctioned and policies have to be made. I think finally comes the policy point where I feel that policy in India is very disaggregated. There's a Ministry of Environment and Forest, there's a Ministry of Road. They're very siloed in their working. I think when projects get decided, there has to be a single team that works on a project that just looks at the technical part, the financial part, and the environmental part at the same time. Typically, even if we see a process of project approval, it is sequential. You know, again, we must understand a political reality that people's aspirations translate via political representatives into demands for certain projects. So at the demand stage itself, the projects get sanctioned. Then we try to find money for it. Once we find money for it, then we try to find, the environmental parts around it. So I think this is where I would suggest, let's respect the land. Let's not alter it unnecessarily. That is number one. Respect the people, bring in their participation in the projects, because there's a local community that's best suited, who's been there for years and years, to let us know how they want the project to be made, how they want that project to serve the needs of the community. And policymakers should be much more coordinated in their approach. I think if these three things, I would say, as a starter point for you, if we can, from my understanding, get these across, and the examples Shubi has given and Sony has given, and I've mentioned some, I think this is what is my sort of suggestion around it.
I did want to ask you about something we were talking about before this session, which I thought was extremely interesting. Mr. Sandhu talked about the importance of failure and acknowledging and learning from failure. Would you like to slightly expand on that?
Yeah, that's my learning from what, nearly 35 years in the civil service and outside. Policymakers, which are largely civil servants in this country, and some technocrats together, I think there is a fear of talking of failure. When we look at large projects, Earth has been here for a long time, and our project is going to be here for a very long time. It is going to outgrow the policymaker. You make an airport, the airport will be there, and we will go back to where we came from. So these are 100-year, 60-year kind of works. Dams get 300 years. I think we need to give up a kind of an embarrassing feeling or a fear of addressing failure. And the example that I gave when we were just before we came to the podium was that I was at the annual meeting of the Canadian Society of Civil Engineers. I was that time representing our country on the board of directors of the World Bank, and they had invited me to Toronto. And at that was an eye-opener for me. At their annual conference, they release only one book. The Canadian Society of Civil Engineers releases only one book, and that book is called The Book of Failures. Because they say what worked, fabulous. But what we need to get together is discuss what did not work. What is our failures? And we need to openly address our failures. There should be no fear of it. Sometimes we feel that as civil servants, if we say that, if we get around and say this didn't work, a political boss might get upset. But I think no. If we actually get around a table and have conferences between ourselves, for example, if DDA organizes an internal conference and says, please tell us what didn't work, and say it openly so that we are able to factor it in and make it better, I think this is important. You see, I mean, failure is part of life. I mean, as that old Urdu share goes, which I don't remember, but it says, you fall only if you ride a horse. If you were on your knees, you will never fall. So if people will do projects, they will take decisions, they will build them, there will be some errors. I think we should discuss them, document them, and find ways of making sure that they don't happen again. I think that's what my recommendation to all policy planners in infrastructure and environment would be.
Thank you. I, this is something that I now try to tell my students as well. Don't be scared of failure. We learn the most from our failures. I'd like to ask the audience to think if they have any questions, you can prepare them. And meanwhile, I'd like to ask Sony one last question. So much of your work seems to help in bridging gaps between institutions, including governmental organizations, with the people affected by their policies. How difficult is this, first of all? And what steps can both sides take to make this a more easy and fruitful meeting of minds?
So as I mentioned earlier, when we think about bringing people as the focus of development and conservation, the main challenge is whose voice can be heard from the ground. I said earlier, I gave a kind of an example. Go and ask in the Delhi airport on how many people know what is a water source. And that can be used as a litmus test. Do we hear the voices of the people who doesn't know the answer to that? Or do we hear the voice of people who knows the answer to that? Very often planners, policymakers tend to hear who doesn't know the answer to that. They will come in a plane, they will give some advice, and they don't know the correct answer, and we hear those voices. And who will know the answer is people who live on the plains and who live close to the water source. And those voices we never get to hear. And that exactly is the reason for failure for most of the people-centered policies to make. This aspect connecting with what Mr. Sandhu said earlier about the respecting the land, we typically make a distinction between what kind of an order can planning make. We say there are two types of orders. One is what we call as a spontaneous order. Naturally, there is an order that is created by the spontaneity of the city in making organic city. On the other hand, planning typically makes what we call as a created order, something which is beautiful that looks on the paper, and then we use the data to create a city like that. The spontaneous order is where we are able to live with the river, live with the water, live with the plants, animals. Beautiful book, 1914, and book by Leopold called Land Ethic, where we talk that we are no longer conquerors of these lived realities around. Rather, we are able to live with it. We are one of the partners in the biotic community. So going back that and living ourselves as by hearing the voices which are connected with the land, water, soil, animals, that is when we are able to really create a people-oriented planning process. Yeah. Yeah.
Just before I pass it on to the audience for questions, I'd like to ask my panelists for any summing up or final comments, if you like.
No, I think the theme I would definitely want to credit has a lot of merit and of bringing about the important conversations on the surface. Saying even the way ma'am set up the context for the entire day today, saying policy, implementation, and finance, because all of them will have to come together to make something happen. And of course, the first and the foremost is the intention. If we have the intention and we are able to find the right set of people, the magic will happen and the development and the conservation will go hand in hand. There's immense design solution out there. I mean, we have been one of the nation which has been able to create the sort of buildings and the the sort of infrastructure which has survived beyond its time, and it's impeccable. We go back to these heritage sites. I mean, just looking at Jantar Mantar, saying how it happened, or even when the lakes, initial lakes, Baulis, and all of it were designed and created, it was beautiful. We definitely can bring it back. We can sustain it, we can maintain it. First is the intention, then is the ecology, and that will create the infrastructure that we want to have. So that's my thought on that. But thank you for having me here, and it was lovely hearing
Thank
all
you,
of the
Mr. Sandhu.
Yeah, this is a city which is centuries old. So, I mean, despite all the criticism, but I think DDA has done a fabulous job in trying to, restructure a, you know, 1,000-year-old city, and keep on trying to make it as modern as possible. One thought that I would suggest is that at the costing stage itself, when we are preparing budget estimates for projects, the environmental cost of that project, I think we need to take a relook at. Some parts of the tender documents that DDA has, I see, have got tree replantation and those kind of costs are factored in. But there are the practical costs that are lying today in the project execution, which I feel are not being estimated properly. And if they are not estimated properly, the contractor will make shortcuts, and then we will have the kind of air quality, etc., that is there in this city at this point of time. For example, GRAP was introduced, but no contractor stopped the construction activity during GRAP. Then the noise pollution guidelines between 10 and 6, no contractor observes that. They'll continue to drill, they'll continue to do whatever they need to do. I think we need to take cognizance of this at the budget estimation stage in projects, because then if we go and do, a regulatory compliance check on a contractor, it'll be much more fair. I mean, I live in Defense Colony, and all night long there is, the drilling goes on, and during GRAP, no construction stopped. So I think that's one thing that I would recommend to you, that make sure that we take the environmental costs into our budgeting stages. That cost will be little compared to the to the total cost of the life cycle of the project. So I think that's something that that we should structure in. And in terms of, again, the financing part, I should say that structure your projects as far as possible as build and maintain, rather than pure EPC, because that is where things go down the line. And I think this is important for us from an environmental perspective. It should be important for a road not to flood. It should be designed with all the parameters in mind by the contractor, and they should be mandated to maintain it over its life cycle, because then they ensure that they build it environmentally correctly. There are many other examples, but I think that's the short point I wanted to make.
Thank you. I think that also connects to the strongly to the point that policies are only as good as their implementation. Yeah. Soni, would you like to sum up in some way?
Though not contradicting with what Mr. Sandhu just said, I want to highlight a point which is often problematic. That is, there is a lot of focus on the infrastructure development in the cities now. And that focus is very often forgetting for whom are we building the city for. Despite of great infrastructure, if city is unlivable, then we have to think about what is it we made it for. That's where we think about what is infrastructure within the larger ecosystem of the city. So that's where we go back to the idea of the growth versus justice, which we talked about. And there, if we take an imagery, if we think about our own houses, very often people invest a lot of time and money into the front door of the house, but the house itself is very bad, unclean. House is not in order, but the front door is very beautiful, elegant. Very often infrastructure's relationship with the larger city is something like that. Our infrastructures are great, but the city itself is poor. And therefore, we should think about what is this infrastructure for if the house is not in order. So that is something for us to think about. How are we imagining our cities with reference to what the cities are made for?
Thank you. I think we have about 5 minutes. I'd like to open it for any questions from the audience. Maybe question or two, if possible. Otherwise, if you could keep your questions brief because of time.
Thank you very much for giving this opportunity. Sir, we talked about policy, we talked about practical arrangements that can be made. When it comes to development versus conversation, then thinking from point of view of a common man, I just want to inquire, is there anything being thought of as a policy and then for implementation that instead of developing larger and larger metro cities and concentrating the entire thing at one place, instead of that, having a in a diversified manner the arrangement, availability, or the development of towns, so that people don't concentrate, comes at one place, make it a total smozzle of that, and unnecessarily getting into trouble that their common whatever what we are saying conservation. I mean that conservation aspect totally gets lost when everything is concentrated at one place. So as a policy, if we can have areas which are developed as a satellite towns or smaller towns, then probably this thing development versus conservation may not come only, and we can continue with development along with conservation of natural resources.
Thank you. This is one of the things we were talking about, how Bangalore is now moving away from the city center, and Hosur and Mangalore are becoming satellite towns almost of Bangalore. Mr. Sandhu, would you like to take that as a policy man?
Thank you for putting me on the spot. But so let me give you two aspects of the question you asked. It's a very relevant question. Do you know that Tokyo has a higher density of population than Delhi? But that doesn't have the problems that we see in Delhi. So first answer is, it's not just concentration, but it is how you manage it and how you design and build around it. But having said that, let me come to what is our country at this point of time. As I said, we are on a development path and we will continue to be. People will come where there is economic sustenance. The government makes sure that underserved areas, some catalyst of development goes. For example, a lot of public sector undertakings, whether it is in steel, coal, other factories, fertilizer, they all went out in underserved areas and are today now sometimes tier 1 or tier 2 towns by themselves. If you look at our NCR, for example, there is a planning board. The satellite magnet towns have been in conversation for nearly 3 decades. Now government is taking a lot of action. There's a line that goes to Meerut. Now a line will go to Panipat. Those fast regional trains are coming in place. So the actions are taking in place, but essentially how we see the economic growth of the country is the answer to your question. Very happy to note that now tier 2 and tier 3 cities are now becoming the engines of development, and therefore some of those problems will be resolved. But there is no replacement for making sure that planning takes into account conservation, takes into account the people at the heart of the project. If we do that, we'll be able to find an answer. We are thinking about it, we are starting to act about it, but there are many lessons that we can learn in Tokyo, Singapore, which are as dense as us, but they manage better. And some of those lessons I am absolutely clear and know that DDA is factoring in those into its planning process. But you are right, it's a question that we have to be aware of and make sure that our policies address that. Absolutely right.
Thank you. I think we're out of time. We're at the end of the session. I'd just like to thank our three panelists for their varied outlooks and how we discussed in a very brief period of time various facets that relate to this development conservation paradigm. Thank you for your patience. Thank you.
We would also like to thank